The sound of shuffling papers and hushed murmurs filled the courtroom, where the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. It was the kind of day where even the walls seemed to lean in, waiting to hear what would happen next. Tension hung heavy in the air, like smoke after a fire. Everyone in the small Pine Creek courthouse knew this wasn't an ordinary case. Deshawn Rivera sat quietly at the defendant's table, dressed in a plain suit jacket his cousin had loaned him, hands folded tightly in front of him. He was only 24, a grocery store clerk, a college dropout, and according to the prosecution, a thief who had broken into a retired couple's home and made off with a small fortune in electronics, cash, and jewelry. The town had been shaken. This wasn't the kind of place where things like this happened. People left their doors unlocked here. That burglary changed all of that, and whoever had done it left no fingerprints, no shoe prints, not even a clear face on the old doorbell cam. For weeks, no one had a clue who it was, until the police dog arrived. Enter Rex, a sleek, muscular German shepherd with a record that made headlines. Trained in narcotics, explosives, and evidence tracking, Rex had assisted in over 24 cases and had become a kind of local celebrity after sniffing out a missing child last year. He was no ordinary dog. He was the prosecution's crown jewel. 3 weeks before the trial, police had revisited Deshawn's neighborhood after receiving a tip. Rex had been deployed during a casual sweep. That was when everything changed. On camera, the dog had moved quickly across the backyards until he paused behind Deshawn's house. In a matter of seconds, he barked and scratched right on cue. The officer praised him, gave him a treat, and called for backup. Within minutes, officers were digging beneath the porch. There, inside an old duffel bag, were several of the missing items from the burglary, including the engraved watch belonging to Mr. Whitaker, the burglary victim. Deshawn was arrested that same night. He'd said he had no idea how the bag got there, but to police, the story was over. Now, the trial had come. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice, banged her gavel to quiet the room. Reporters sat in the back with their laptops open, ready to fire off another story that would make tomorrow's headlines. A few people in the crowd craned their necks to get a better view of Deshawn. They weren't sure if they should pity him or hate him. Near the back row, in a worn-out pew-style bench, sat a young woman with her daughter, trying to keep the little girl entertained with a small plastic pony toy. The girl, barely 3 years old, had big brown eyes and a head full of wild curls. Her name was Lily. She kicked her legs quietly, humming to herself, bored by all the serious voices and frowning adults. She had no idea she was about to change everything. The prosecutor rose to give her opening statement. With practiced confidence, she painted Deshawn as a man desperate for money, who knew the neighborhood well and thought he could outsmart the system. She played the video of the dog sniffing and alerting. The jury watched carefully. The prosecutor pointed to the screen. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the moment the truth came out. This K-9 unit trained, tested, and trusted found stolen property buried right here. You can't plant that. You can't fake that. Only one person had access to that space. The defendant. Deshawn's public defender, a soft-spoken but sharp young attorney named Malik Yates, stood when it was his turn. He didn't argue the dog's record, nor did he try to attack the evidence, at least not yet. Instead, he focused on the idea of doubt. What you're seeing here, he told the jury, is not a dog solving a mystery. What you're seeing is a reaction interpreted by a human, driven by assumptions. Let's not forget, no fingerprints, no DNA, no eyewitness, only a dog and a hunch. He let those words hang in the air. But from the looks of it, the jury didn't bite. The dog was trusted. The dog had done its job. And the video? Well, it looked pretty clear. The day went on with witness testimony, neighbors saying they hadn't seen much, a crime scene officer confirming the location of the bag, and a retired cop vouching for Rex's reliability. The defense seemed to be treading water. That was when Lily leaned over to her mother and whispered something quiet, sweet, and completely out of place in the courtroom. "Mommy," she said, "that dog only barked 'cause the man gave him the cookie first." Her mother froze for a second. "What did you say, baby?" "The dog barked when the man gave him the cookie," Lily repeated. "I saw it outside. He had the cookie already." She was talking about the day Rex found the bag. Lily and her mom lived just across the street from Deshawn's house. They had been home that day, sitting on their porch when the police arrived with the dog. Lily had been fascinated watching the big dog run around the yards. Her mom had barely paid attention, sipping coffee while chatting with a friend on the phone. But Lily remembered everything. Her mom didn't think much of it, until she noticed the defense attorney walking past them during a break. She gently tapped his arm and said, "Excuse me, my daughter just said something. I don't know if it matters, but..." He listened. He knelt to Lily's eye level and asked her to repeat what she said, and she did. He didn't say much. Beck just nodded, thanked her, and walked away, deep in thought. That moment would become the start of something no one in that courtroom saw coming. Because while everyone else had trusted the footage, the officers, and the barking dog only, Lily had trusted what she saw with her own innocent, unfiltered eyes. And what she saw would flip the entire case upside down. In Pine Creek, Rex wasn't just any police dog, he was a legend. Children wanted to take selfies with him at school assemblies. Adults nodded in admiration when he passed by on patrol. He had sniffed out narcotics in a truckload of groceries, found a runaway teen in a field of tall corn, and once located an old man with Alzheimer's who'd wandered off in winter. If there was ever a symbol of law and order in the town, it was Rex. So when the court watched the body cam footage of Rex alerting behind Deshawn's porch, the reaction was predictable. Eyebrows raised, jaws tightened. The jurors stared intently. On the screen, the dog's movement was precise. Tail up, nose to the ground, ears twitching until he stopped, barked twice, and scratched at the dirt beneath the porch's edge. The handler, Officer Bronson, gave a single command, "Good boy, Rex," and casually reached into his vest to hand the German shepherd a biscuit. It was quick, just a flash of movement, barely noticeable unless someone had a reason to look closely, but no one questioned it. Officer Bronson took the stand that day, tall and composed, wearing his dark blue uniform with a crisp badge that shimmered under the fluorescent courtroom lights. He spoke with the kind of confidence that came from experience. Rex is trained to detect several sense explosives, narcotics, and human presence linked to recent activity, he explained. His alert behind the porch indicated that he detected either a recent human trace or a scent associated with the stolen items. He turned to the judge, then the jury. "I trust Rex's signals more than I trust most people's words." The prosecutor nodded approvingly. It was powerful testimony. To many jurors, it felt like a seal of truth. A trained dog doesn't lie. It doesn't hold a grudge or make assumptions. If Rex said something was there, then something was there. And there was. Officers had unearthed the duffel bag just where Rex signaled. Inside it, a stack of cash, 2 tablets, a diamond bracelet, and most damning of all, an antique gold pocket watch, engraved with the name E. M. Whitaker. Mr. Whitaker, now in his 70s, had taken the stand earlier that week. His voice had shaken with age and emotion. "My father gave me that watch. It's priceless to me. I never thought I'd see it again." His tearful gratitude to the police and to Rex had deeply moved the courtroom. Even the judge's expression had softened. So how could anyone argue against that? The defense had tried gently, but the odds were stacked. Deshawn had no prior convictions, no history of theft or violence, but he also had no solid alibi. He had told police he was at home that afternoon, watching YouTube on his phone, and had no idea how the stolen bag ended up under his porch. It sounded like a weak excuse, and the jury seemed to think so too. But the defense attorney, Malik Yates, wasn't done. He had begun assembling a timeline of the police K9 search, carefully matching the body cam timestamps with statements from neighbors. A few said they saw Rex sniff around the backyards of 3 homes before pausing behind Deshawn's. But one witness had mentioned something unusual, something so subtle it had been overlooked until Malik heard about the little girl, Lily. According to the neighbor, the officer seemed to pause near Deshawn's yard longer than expected. He kind of hung back. I thought maybe he saw something on the ground, or he was waiting for the dog to catch a scent, she had said. But now, in the light of Lily's words, the man gave him the cookie first. The moment took on a new meaning. Was it possible? The dog was influenced? Dogs like Rex aren't robots. They're living, breathing animals who train daily with their handlers, and over time, learn to read their cues. And handlers, whether they mean to or not, often give off subtle signals, Tiny. Movements, shifts in voice, or changes in body language that dogs pick up on. This unintentional behavior is known as cueing. Malik had read about it in legal journals and canine training manuals. There were cases in other states where drug-sniffing dogs gave false positives because of unintentional handler influence. Sometimes, even an eager glance toward a particular area was enough to cause a dog to signal or pretend just to please their partner and earn that coveted treat. The footage now needed a closer look. Malik spent that evening alone in his office, replaying the video dozens of times, freezing the frame every second. And then he saw it. Officer Bronson's right hand moved into his vest before Rex barked, not after. He reached, paused, and only then did Rex make the signal. To the untrained eye, it looked like a seamless interaction. But to someone who understood how dogs are trained, it raised a red flag. Was it possible Rex had been anticipating the reward? Malik reached out to an expert, a retired canine handler from the next county over, named Frank Delgado, who now worked as a consultant. Frank agreed to meet the next morning. Over coffee and a laptop in a quiet diner, Malik played the footage. Frank leaned in, nodding slowly. "You see that?" he said, pointing to the officer's shoulder. "That's a lean. He's expecting something." And right there, he tapped the screen again. That hand-to-pocket motion is a problem. Dogs like Rex are smart. They know the routine. A reward-ready handler can influence a signal, even without knowing it. Malik's heart beat faster. He'd found something. It wasn't solid proof, but it was enough to raise a reasonable doubt. And reasonable doubt was all he needed. Back at the courthouse the next day, the prosecution continued their case, confident in the evidence. But behind the scenes, Malik was preparing a motion to bring Frank in as a witness and planning a cross-examination. That would ask one simple question: can a dog be wrong if the person guiding him is? The story was shifting. And in the background of it all, little Lily sat quietly on the courtroom bench, coloring in a notebook, completely unaware that her casual observation, spoken with innocence and honesty, was about to shake the entire case. The courtroom was buzzing during recess. Lawyers shuffled papers, jurors whispered among themselves, and officers lingered near the exit, chatting about lunch. It was a typical break in a high-stakes trial, except one person wasn't thinking about food, evidence, or court strategy. That person was 3-year-old Lily Matthews. She sat in the back row, legs swinging, holding a half-eaten cracker in one hand and a small blue pony toy in the other. Her eyes weren't focused on the lawyers or the judge. She was staring at the large dog she'd seen on TV, now lying peacefully. Beside its handler near the witness box Rex, the canine hero. The dog looked different in real life. Bigger, quieter, and for reasons only a child's mind could understand, Lily couldn't stop thinking about the day she saw Rex in her neighborhood. She tugged on her mother's blouse gently. "Mommy?" she whispered. Her mother, Rachel Matthews, glanced down. "Yes, baby?" Lily leaned close, her voice barely louder than a breath. The doggy only barked when the man gave him the cookie. Rachel blinked. "What do you mean?" Lily repeated it, a little louder now. That day outside, when the man gave the doggy the cookie, then the dog barked. Rachel stared at her daughter, puzzled. The courtroom noises faded in her mind as she processed what Lily just said. It seemed innocent, silly, even. But something about it stuck. Cookie first, bark second? That was the opposite of what had been shown in court. The video footage clearly showed the dog barking, then getting the treat. But Lily insisted it happened the other way around. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Lily nodded and shrugged. He had the cookie in his hand when the doggy looked at him. Then the doggy barked, and then he got it. Rachel remembered that day, clearly now sitting on their porch across the street, watching the police officers with the dog. She hadn't paid close attention, but Lily had been staring the entire time, fascinated. Rachel was a single mom and a legal secretary at a nearby firm. She wasn't an expert in criminal law, but she knew enough about trials and evidence to realize what her daughter might have just said. She hesitated. Should she say something? Would anyone even believe a toddler's version of events? That was when she noticed Malik Yates, the defense attorney, passing by their bench with a cup of coffee. She stood up. "Excuse me, Mr. Yates?" He stopped, surprised by the unfamiliar voice. "Yes?" Rachel hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I'm not sure if this matters, but my daughter saw something the day your client was arrested. She just said the officer gave the dog a treat before it barked, not after." Malik's eyes narrowed slightly. He knelt down to Lily's level. "Hi there. Can I ask you something?" he said with a calm smile. "What did the doggy do that day?" Lily didn't hesitate. He looked at the man. The man had a cookie. Then the doggy barked and got the cookie. Malik didn't react outwardly, but his heart started to race. It was subtle, so small. But if Lily was right, if the treat came first, it meant the dog may have been responding to a cue, not a scent. In canine handling, that difference was massive, and potentially case-breaking. He stood up, thanked Rachel, and said quietly, "Would you mind staying through the afternoon session? I might want to speak with you both again." Rachel nodded. She was unsure what any of this meant, but the serious expression on Malik's face told her it was something important. Back in his office during the lunch break, Malik went into overdrive. He replayed the body cam footage again, frame by frame. And now, with Lily's words in mind, he noticed it clearly. Just a few seconds before Rex barked, Officer Bronson's hand went into his vest pocket. Not just a casual gesture, it was deliberate. The treat was already in his fingers. To most people, that might not mean much. But to a trained dog, that small movement was a signal. And in that moment, Malik saw something he hadn't seen before. Rex glanced sideways, not at the ground, but directly at his handler's hand, just before he barked. That tiny glance was everything. Malik knew now he had something real. A thread that, if pulled, could unravel the entire case. He made a few calls. First, to his assistant to request a subpoena for canine training records. Second, to Frank Delgado, the retired canine expert who had already agreed to consult. Then he typed up a motion to introduce new testimony based on possible handler cueing, backed by a newly identified witness observation, a civilian who had seen the arrest unfold in real time. He didn't list Lily's name. Not yet. She was a child. But he included her mother's statement and asked for permission to have the court consider new evidence that could challenge the reliability of Rex's alert. The judge agreed to hear the motion after the lunch recess. When court resumed, the atmosphere had shifted. The jury didn't know the details yet, but the prosecutor looked slightly unsettled. She had noticed the defense attorney's changed energy, the subtle shift. In confidence, Malik stood and said, "Your Honor, I'm filing a motion to introduce expert testimony regarding the reliability of the police canine's alert and potential evidence of handler influence that may have compromised the search." The judge raised her eyebrows. "Handler influence?" "Yes, Your Honor," Malik said. "We believe the alert shown in the body cam footage may have been the result of unconscious cueing by the officer, giving the appearance of a legitimate detection when in fact, the canine may have responded to a non-verbal signal, not the scent itself." The courtroom fell silent. Even Officer Bronson looked up, surprised. The judge nodded. "We'll schedule a hearing. Bring your expert. The court will hear the arguments." In the back of the room, Rachel squeezed Lily's hand. Lily looked up and whispered, "Is the doggy in trouble?" Rachel smiled gently. "No, baby. The doggy did what he was told, but sometimes grown-ups make mistakes." And for the first time since the trial began, Deshaun Rivera looked up from the defendant's table with a flicker of hope in his eyes. He didn't know exactly what had changed, but he could feel it. The courtroom was quieter, now too quiet. Everyone felt the shift, though no one dared to say it aloud. The confident rhythm the prosecution had danced to all week was gone. In its place was an uneasiness, a subtle tension that clung to the walls like smoke after a fire. Even the jury, once leaning forward eagerly during the footage of the police dog's alert, now wore more cautious expressions. Thoughtful, wary. It was all because of a whisper from a child. And the video that, once considered airtight, was now under a very different kind of spotlight. The next morning, court resumed with the introduction of a new witness, Frank Delgado, a retired canine handler with 28 years of experience in law enforcement. Unlike the starched uniforms and confident postures seen earlier, Frank entered humbly plain shirt, modest blazer, no theatrics. He didn't need them. His credibility walked in with him. Malik Yates, the defense attorney, wasted no time. "Mr. Delgado, would you please explain to the court what cueing means in canine operations?" Frank nodded. "Yes, sir. Cueing is a term used to describe when a handler unintentionally signals the dog through body language, tone, movement, even eye contact. Most of the time, it's subconscious. But it can influence the dog to behave in ways that appear like a valid alert, even when no target odor is present." Some jury members scribbled notes. Others just stared, absorbing the implications. Malik continued, "Have you reviewed the body cam footage submitted into evidence?" "I have." "And based on your professional opinion, what did you observe?" Frank took a breath. At timestamp 0 hours 36 minutes and 4 seconds, the handler begins reaching for a treat before the dog has made any signal. The dog notices this hand motion and glances up. Seconds later, he gives a bark and a paw scratch, what looks like a classic alert, but there's no indication of independent scent detection. It appears behavior was prompted. Gasps weren't heard, but the room shifted like everyone inhaled and forgot to breathe out. Malik pressed further. "So, you believe the dog may have reacted to the officer's movement, not an actual scent?" "Yes. Based on the footage, the dog appears to be anticipating reward, not responding to detection." The prosecution objected, trying to challenge the expert's credibility. Speculation, the attorney snapped. He wasn't there. He's watching a video. But Frank stayed calm. With all due respect, I've trained over 150 dogs. I can recognize a true alert versus a performance. And dogs often perform when they see the reward coming too soon. The judge allowed the testimony. Malik sat down, knowing he had just planted a powerful seed of doubt. Now, the jury wasn't looking at the dog as a flawless, instinct-driven machine. They were starting to see him for what he truly was, a highly trained animal, but one that could be misled. And that wasn't all. Because outside the courtroom, something else was happening. Malik's assistant, a young intern named Priya, had spent the previous evening digging into police records, specifically Officer Bronson's K-9 reports. What she found was a pattern. Of the last 22 alerts made by Rex, not one had led to a physical arrest based solely on the dog's signal until Deshaun Rivera's case. Most alerts had been general. None had included precise recovery of hidden items, except this one. Too perfect. It wasn't illegal, but it was rare, suspicious even. And coupled with the timing of the handler's reward gesture, it began to tell a very different story. Malik decided to take a risk. He called Officer Bronson back to the stand. The officer walked confidently, but there was a flicker of defensiveness in his eyes, like a student being retested on a question he thought he'd already passed. Malik stood. Officer Bronson, do you recall the moment when Rex gave the alert? Behind the defendant's home? I do. Can you describe your actions during that moment? I was standing about 3 feet away. Rex signaled. I verbally affirmed the signal and gave him a reward treat, per protocol. Were you already reaching for the treat before Rex barked? The room stiffened. Bronson hesitated, not intentionally. Did you have the treat in your hand before the alert was complete? Another pause. I may have begun to reach, but the bark came first. Malik held up a still frame from the body cam footage, printed clearly. It showed Bronson's hand partially inside his vest treat visible, before the dog made any sound. This image was pulled directly from the footage. Do you still maintain that you waited for the signal? Bronson's face twitched. I didn't mean to give a cue, if that's what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, officer. I'm showing what happened. Is it possible you unintentionally influenced your dog's behavior that day? Silence. The officer shifted in his seat. It's possible, but I don't believe I did. Malik gave a respectful nod. That's all I needed. When? He returned to his seat. Even the prosecution seemed quieter. Less sure. Because now, the jury had not only an expert's opinion, but a visible inconsistency in the officer's own actions. Suddenly, the solid case built on canine certainty was crumbling not with a bang, but with a soft, slow unraveling that started with a toddler's whisper. In the back of the courtroom, Rachel Matthews watched the exchange with cautious pride. Her daughter sat beside her, oblivious to the storm she'd started, munching on fruit snacks and humming quietly. Lily had simply told the truth. She saw what she saw. A cookie before a bark, a treat before a signal. And now, a courtroom was listening not just to lawyers and officers, but to the overlooked details that only innocence could reveal. By the end of the day, the judge granted the defense's motion. The reliability of the dog alert was officially in question. That changed everything. Without a dependable canine alert, the prosecution's case was stripped to its bones. No eyewitnesses. No fingerprints, no DNA. Just a bag under a porch, and a man who said he didn't put it there. For the first time since the trial began, Deshaun Rivera looked like more than a suspect. He looked like someone who might actually walk free. All because someone noticed the cookie came before the bark. By the 5th day of trial, the rhythm of the courtroom had completely shifted. What had begun as a prosecution-led procession solid evidence, a trustworthy police dog, and a strong narrative, was now unraveling thread by thread. The jurors, once confident and attentive, had grown quiet and contemplative. They no longer sat leaning toward the prosecution's table. Instead, they sat back in their chairs, guarded, watching every move with new suspicion. But one voice still hadn't been heard in court. Not officially. Lily Matthews, the 3-year-old girl whose quiet words had sparked the unraveling, wasn't brought to the witness stand. Malik Yates, the defense attorney, knew better than to put a toddler under the pressure of cross-examination. Instead, he brought forward someone else, Mrs. Norma Jeffers, a retired schoolteacher and next-door neighbor to Lily's family, stepped into the courtroom as the next defense witness. She wasn't dressed like someone looking to make a scene modest. Calm, a neutral expression that gave her an air of sincerity. Malik approached carefully. "Mrs. Jeffers, were you present on the day police searched Mr. Rivera's property?" "I was," she replied softly. "Can you describe where you were and what you saw?" "I was on my porch, having my afternoon tea. I saw the officers with the dog come through the yard. They went past a couple of homes and spent quite a bit of time behind Deshawn's." "What struck you as unusual?" She paused. "The officer. He gave the dog something just before the dog made any sound. That was strange to me. I didn't think that's how they usually do it." "And how close were you when you saw this?" "Close enough. I saw the dog look up at the officer. Then he barked. It was almost like the dog was responding to the man, not the ground." The courtroom held its breath. The prosecution objected again, hearsay, speculation, but the judge overruled. This wasn't technical testimony. It was an eyewitness observation, and one that mirrored what the child Lily had quietly revealed days earlier. After Mrs. Jeffers stepped down, Malik stood silently for a moment in front of the jury. He didn't pace. He didn't shout. He simply said, "You've now heard 2 civilian witnesses describe the same thing, one, a child with no motive, and one respected neighbor with no stake in the case. Neither of them were asked to see what they saw, but they noticed what professionals missed." He turned back toward Deshawn and nodded. The case was shifting again, and the prosecution knew it. Their team scrambled to reinforce the credibility of their K-9 evidence. They called up Lieutenant Alan Moss, a senior officer in the K-9 division, to speak on Rex's long-standing service record. Moss tried to repair the damage by reminding the jury of Rex's past success: missing children found, narcotics intercepted, community service awards. "Rex doesn't know pressure," Moss said. "He doesn't lie. He doesn't exaggerate. He does what he's trained to do." But Malik's cross-examination undercut that narrative. "Lieutenant Moss, would you agree dogs are influenced by their environment?" "Of course." "Would you also agree they're motivated by food and praise?" "Yes." "And if a handler accidentally signals to the dog, that might cause the dog to perform a behavior, even if the target scent isn't there?" "Well, in theory, yes. But our dogs are trained to avoid that." Malik leaned in slightly. "Avoiding and eliminating are not the same thing, are they?" "No," Moss admitted, after a long pause. "They're not." That was it. The courtroom could feel the foundation cracking. A trial that once seemed centered around infallible evidence now looked like it had been built on shaky assumptions and an animal's subconscious obedience to human reward. And what about Deshawn? He had barely spoken since his arrest. His choice to stay silent during the trial was advised by counsel, but the judge allowed Malik to recall him, this time briefly. Deshawn's hands shook slightly as he took the stand, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment. Malik approached slowly. "Mr. Rivera, Did you know there was a duffel bag buried beneath your back porch? No, sir, Deshawn said firmly. I had no idea. Did you put it there? No. Were you home the day Rex and the officers searched your property? Yes. I heard noise outside. I looked through the blinds and saw the officers. I opened the door, and next thing I know, they're pulling stuff out the ground and cuffing me. Did you cooperate? I did everything they asked. Malik nodded. That's all. Thank you. Deshawn stepped down, eyes locked forward, not angry, not pleading, just hopeful that maybe finally someone would believe him. Outside the courtroom, news had already begun to spread. A few bloggers and local reporters were calling it the cookie case. The story of how a treat and a little girl's memory of it challenged a trained police dog's alert and shook an entire prosecution. And through it all, Lily remained blissfully unaware. Her mother, Rachel, had chosen to keep things simple. With her daughter, she told her, "You help someone today by telling the truth. That's what brave people do." Lily had just smiled. "Can I have cookies now?" Rachel laughed. "Yes, baby. You've earned them." Meanwhile, the judge announced that closing arguments would begin the next day. It would come down to this: a trusted police dog, a handler's small, possibly unconscious mistake, an innocent man with no physical evidence tying him to the crime, and a child whose words spoke louder than any testimony in the courtroom. The truth had started as a whisper. Now it was echoing louder by the hour. No one could predict what the verdict would be. But one thing was clear. This trial was no longer about a burglary. It was about perception versus reality, about how we trust authority and what happens when those we rely on, whether man or animal, are unintentionally influenced. And the jury had heard enough to question everything. The following morning, a hush settled over the courtroom before the judge even entered. It was different now, deeper, heavier, as if the very walls could sense that the case was reaching its boiling point. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Reporters, college students studying law, retired activists, and even dog lovers with homemade signs. One sign read, "Justice over instinct." Another, "Even heroes make mistakes. That's why we have courts." The public had caught wind of the trial's bizarre twist. A toddler's offhand comment, a police dog's flawed alert, and the rising suspicion that a man might be behind bars due to a treat and a gesture. Inside, all eyes turned to the prosecution. They were playing defense now. They had one card left: Officer Jake Trenton, Rex's handler. The man who, unknowingly or not, might have signaled Rex to alert at the spot beneath Deshawn Rivera's porch. Officer Trenton walked in tall and proud, dressed in full uniform, his badge polished to a shine. But his eyes betrayed him. No longer did they hold the steady confidence of a man whose evidence had never been questioned. Now they shifted between jurors, the judge, and Malik Yates, nervous, uncertain. He took the stand, straightening his back as the prosecution began. "Officer Trenton," the prosecutor said gently, "can you remind the court how long you've worked with Rex?" 4 years, sir," Trenton said. "We've done over 100 successful searches together." "And how would you describe your working relationship with Rex?" "He's reliable, sharp. We train constantly. I trust him more than most people I know." A few in the courtroom smiled. It was easy to admire the loyalty. But this wasn't about faith. It was about fact. The prosecution asked a few more questions, mainly to reinforce the training protocols. But they knew the real storm was coming from the other side. Malik stood slowly and approached. "Officer Trenton, do you recall the moment Rex alerted under Mr. Rivera's porch?" "Yes," Trenton said firmly. "Did you offer Rex a treat or reward before he gave his alert?" Trenton paused. His eyes flickered. I gave him a scent cue, he said. That's standard. Once he begins a sweep, he knows it's work time. Did you offer a treat? Another pause. I had one in my hand. It's part of his motivation, but I didn't give it to him until after. Are you absolutely certain? I believe so, Trenton replied, though not with the same confidence as before. Malik stepped closer, but calmly. Officer, are you aware that Rex looked at you and wagged his tail before barking, before the alert? Trenton's mouth tightened. I don't recall that exactly. Would it surprise you to know that 2 independent witnesses, one of them, a child, observed Rex receiving a treat before barking? I don't think that's accurate. Malik nodded as if he expected the answer. Then he pulled a USB drive from his coat pocket. Your Honor, we request to show slowed-down body cam footage from the day in question. The judge approved it, and all eyes turned to the screen as the footage played. There it was, Trenton kneeling beside Rex, hand reaching into his pouch, Rex looking up, and then barking. The timing was tight, mere seconds, but in slow motion, it was undeniable. The bark followed the reward. The room held its breath. Malik paused the video. Officer Trenton, would you consider this an example of what K-9 experts call anticipatory alerting? Trenton swallowed hard. It could be interpreted that way? In other words, Rex may have thought the signal to alert had already come because the treat was already there. I suppose that's possible, Trenton muttered. The jury didn't miss the shift. The strong, unbreakable bond between handler and dog had just revealed a flaw, not in loyalty, but in procedure. The implication was clear. Rex wasn't lying. Trenton wasn't corrupt, but the system had faltered. Malik didn't gloat. He didn't press further. He simply stepped back. No further questions. When Trenton left the stand, he avoided eye contact with the gallery. It was clear the burden of unintended error weighed heavier on him than accusation ever could. As the court recessed for lunch, whispers filled the hallways. One juror was heard saying to another, "He didn't mean it." But that doesn't mean Deshawn isn't innocent. The public narrative was catching up now. News outlets were already pushing headlines. K-9 handler admits mistake may have influenced evidence. Justice on a leash. When loyalty and law collide. 3-year-old girl may have changed the course of a criminal trial. Inside the courtroom, Deshawn sat silently, rubbing his hands together. For the first time in weeks, his face looked different. Less like a man condemned. More like a man waiting for sunrise after a long, sleepless night. Malik knew the real test would come soon, closing arguments, and then the verdict. But he had something few defense attorneys ever had. A case built on empathy, error, and truth, not through shouting or theatrics, but through observation. And the most powerful observation of all had come from someone who hadn't even known she was making one. Lily and her mother weren't in court that day. Rachel had taken her home, not wanting the little girl to become overwhelmed by adult drama and public attention. But at home, as Lily colored on the floor, she looked up and asked, "Did the dog say sorry?" Rachel paused, then smiled. "In his own way, sweetie. He did. And maybe he had." Sometimes mistakes happen not out of malice, but out of trust. Handler trusting his dog, a dog trusting his handler, and a child trusting her memory. And in the space between those moments, truth often hides. Now, it was up to the jury to find it. By the time the court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. What had started as a routine case, just another statistic in the system, was now something else. The story had grown legs, and it wasn't just the jury listening anymore. America was paying attention. National media trucks now lined the courthouse parking lot. Cameras swiveled each time someone stepped through the front doors. Anchors used phrases like, potential miscarriage of justice, and the power of a child's voice. Social media was flooded with clips of the slowed-down body cam footage and a new viral hashtag. Hashtag Lily changed everything inside. The final day of the trial was underway. Both sides had made their cases. Now, it was time for closing arguments, the moment that would echo in jurors' minds as they deliberated the fate of Deshaun Rivera. The judge, solemn and composed, looked over his glasses at both legal teams. You may proceed with your closing statements. The prosecutor stood first. He walked slowly to the center of the courtroom and looked at the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, we must not lose sight of the facts. A police dog alerted to stolen property beneath the defendant's porch. That property matched items reported missing. We have procedures for a reason, and while no system is perfect, Rex has an impeccable track record. He's not just a tool, he's a professional, highly trained and tested. He paced gently. There may be questions about the exact moment of the alert, about when a treat was given. But speculation isn't evidence. The real evidence is what was found and where. You must ask yourselves, could it really all be coincidence? He turned toward Deshaun. A man hides stolen property beneath his home, and a dog who has found over 100 such caches in his career finds it. Again, that's not an accident, that's guilt. He stepped back. We ask you to return a verdict of guilty. The room remained silent, but no one looked convinced. Now it was Malik Yates's turn. He stood without papers, without notes, just calm conviction in his voice. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, what we just heard was a closing argument built on a flawed assumption that systems can't fail. He paused. But systems do fail. They fail quietly, sometimes even with the best intentions. This isn't about whether Rex is a good dog. He is. It's not about whether Officer Trenton is honest. I believe he is. This is about what happens when small moments imperceptible to most change the course of someone's life. He walked toward the jury box slowly. This case turned not because of outrage or scandal or a dramatic twist. It turned because a 3-year-old girl, sitting on a sidewalk, watched something adults missed. She wasn't distracted by assumptions or protocol. She just saw a dog get a treat, then bark and told the truth. He let the words sit there. A child's voice led us to review the footage. And that footage shows a dog rewarded before alerting. That is not standard. That is not reliable. That is not justice. He now addressed them more softly. You were told to consider the evidence. So ask yourself, can you trust the evidence when it was compromised before it was even collected? The jurors listened carefully, some nodding slightly. Malik leaned forward, delivering his final blow. Today, this is about Deshaun Rivera. But tomorrow, it could be about someone else. Someone innocent. If we don't demand higher standards in how justice is pursued, especially when using dogs who can't testify, who can't explain their signals, then we allow human error to disguise itself as truth. He turned back to his seat. I ask you not just to find Mr. Rivera not guilty. I ask you to send a message that justice cannot rest on assumptions, even when they wear a badge or wag a tail. The courtroom was still. Even the judge didn't move for a moment. Then, softly, jury will now be dismissed for deliberation. Behind closed doors, the jurors disappeared into the deliberation room. Outside, the world speculated and tweeted. Inside, there was only the rustle of legal pads, coffee cups being stirred, and the weight of one decision. At first, the vote was divided, 5 guilty, 4 not guilty, 3 unsure. But the footage kept playing in their heads. The hesitation in Officer Trenton's voice. The undeniable moment Rex was rewarded before the bark. And that little girl's voice. He just wanted his treat. Over the next few hours, things began to change. Juror number 7, a retired teacher, said, "If we were just judging a criminal record, it'd be different, but we're judging evidence. And this evidence doesn't meet the bar." Others agreed. Slowly, steadily, the room shifted. Back in the courtroom 4 hours later, the bailiff entered. "The jury has reached a verdict." Everyone stood. The judge asked the foreperson, "Has the jury reached a unanimous decision?" "We have, Your Honor." The envelope was handed over. The judge unfolded it, glanced at the words, then looked at Deshawn. In the matter of the state versus Deshawn Rivera on the charge of felony possession of stolen property. A pause. "We find the defendant not guilty." The courtroom erupted not in cheers, but in collective release. As if the air had been held for days, and everyone was finally breathing again. Deshawn's mother wept quietly. His attorney exhaled in relief. Even Officer Trenton, sitting alone, gave a subtle nod not of approval, but acceptance. Aftermath. Outside, reporters scrambled. Microphones crowded around Malik, who said only, "We didn't prove innocence. We proved doubt." And that was enough, because in this country, doubt is supposed to protect us. Later that evening, Rachel turned on the news as Lily played with her stuffed animals. On the screen, 3-year-old girl's observation helps. "Free innocent man." Lily looked up. "That's me," she whispered, barely audible. Rachel kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, that's you." And somewhere in another town, another courtroom, another police department, someone reviewed footage of their own, wondering how many other quiet truths had been overlooked. The courtroom had emptied, and the press had packed up their gear. The sun dipped low behind the courthouse steps, casting long shadows over the now quiet street. The trial that had captured national attention was over. Deshawn Rivera was free. Not because of a technicality or luck, but because a small voice had spoken truth in a world of assumptions. Rachel Matthews sat in her modest living room. Lily curled asleep on her lap, the soft rise and fall of her breathing a soothing rhythm. The tiny girl's innocent words, "The doggy had the cookie first," had done what no seasoned attorney or veteran officer could. They had cracked open a case and let justice shine through. Rachel glanced down at her daughter's peaceful face and marveled at how such a simple observation had made a seismic impact. It was a reminder, she thought, that sometimes the purest truth comes in the smallest packages. Ripples beyond the courtroom, Deshawn Rivera walked out of the courthouse. A free man. The weight of uncertainty lifted from his shoulders, replaced by the fragile hope of reclaiming a life interrupted. His family gathered around him, tears blending relief and joy. But freedom was only the beginning. Local news covered the case extensively. Legal analysts debated how the cookie before the bark moment had spotlighted the fallibility of canine evidence, a pillar often taken for granted in criminal trials. Police departments across the state launched internal reviews of their canine training and handling procedures. Officer Jake Trenton faced intense scrutiny. Though cleared of any intentional wrongdoing, he volunteered to undergo additional training on unbiased canine handling. His public apology, heartfelt and humble, was met with mixed reactions. Some praised his honesty. Others questioned the oversight that nearly cost an innocent man his freedom. Malik Yates, the defense attorney, received invitations to speak on legal panels and podcasts, sharing how the smallest details can turn a trial around. Yet he never forgot the quiet observer whose words had set the wheels in motion. A lesson. In listening, meanwhile, Lily's story became a symbol far beyond one courtroom. Schools discussed the importance of observation and honesty. Parenting groups praised Rachel for trusting her daughter's words. The public debate expanded. How often do we dismiss the perspectives of those we deem too young or too inexperienced? The viral hashtag Lily changed everything, inspired people worldwide to pay closer attention to overlooked voices, children, marginalized communities, even quiet witnesses in everyday life. Rachel kept her daughter grounded. "You didn't just say something," she told Lily one afternoon. "You helped change the world a little bit." Lily grinned, tugging at her mother's sleeve. "Can I have more cookies now?" Rachel laughed. "Always, baby, always." Reflections on Justice Judge Emily Sanders, who had presided over the case, later reflected on the trial during a legal conference. "The Rivera case reminded me, and many others, that justice isn't just about evidence or procedure," she said. "It's about truth and the humility to admit when our systems aren't perfect. It's about listening sometimes to the most unexpected voices." She spoke of the importance of ongoing reforms in forensic science and law enforcement, emphasizing transparency and accountability. Deshawn's new beginning for Deshawn Rivera. The verdict was not just a release from legal shackles, but a chance to rebuild. Though his name was cleared, scars remained both emotional and social. The stigma of arrest did not evaporate overnight. He committed himself to advocacy work, partnering with local organizations to raise awareness about wrongful arrests and the complexities of canine evidence. Deshawn's story became a beacon for reform, a testimony that justice can be restored, even if delayed. The dog named Rex. What of Rex the canine at the heart of the case? He returned to training, but with renewed protocols that prioritized eliminating handler influence. Rex remained a beloved member of the force, celebrated for his skills, but also a reminder that even heroes are not infallible. His story appeared in police newsletters and canine training seminars, often framed as a cautionary tale and a learning opportunity. The enduring impact the trial had lasting consequences, not just legally, but culturally. Courts began requiring more rigorous standards for canine alert evidence. Police departments reviewed training manuals to reduce unconscious cueing. Communities engaged more deeply in conversations about policing and fairness. And most poignantly, the public was reminded that justice is a collective responsibility where every voice, no matter how small, matters. Final thoughts. As night fell over the city, Rachel tucked Lily into bed one last time before bedtime stories. "Did you know, Lily?" she whispered. "Your little words changed everything? You helped free a man who didn't have a voice." Lily's eyes sparkled sleepily. "I just told the truth, Mommy." Rachel smiled, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. "Sometimes that's all it takes." And with that, the tiny girl drifted into dreams, her impact echoing far beyond what she could ever imagine. The story of Lily, the dog named Rex, and a man named Deshawn reminds us that justice isn't always loud or grand. Sometimes it's a whisper heard only by those who are willing to listen.